This island will be gone in a matter of minutes.
Resident Evil Survivor has a reputation. A bad game, weak spin-off, the one nobody wanted. Most people repeat that without ever playing it. And yeah, it's not on the same level as Resident Evil 1, 2, or 3. There's no puzzles or survival tension, no big scares. But if you play it, it's different. It's fast, straightforward, shoot zombies and keep moving. It's short enough that it never drags. There's branching paths that give you new weapons, new story beats. It's just simple, thoughtless fun. And the part that a lot of people forget is, this was Capcom experimenting, first-person Resident Evil, an early step towards the style they'd bring back years later.
Though I can't remember anything, I know that this was no way for anyone to die.
Light gun games were everywhere in the late 90s. Arcades had games like Time Crisis, House of the Dead, weird ones like Carnival, all those quick-hit shooters that ate your quarters that you've been saving up for all week. Consoles tried to bring that home with the Gun-Con, the Super Scope. Even the Sega had one. You point at the screen, pull the trigger, you feel like you're in the arcade without actually leaving the house. Capcom wanted in on that. They already had Resident Evil locked in as one of the biggest survival horror games ever made. But this genre was slow, deliberate, about managing tension. Light gun shooters were the exact opposite of that. Fast, reactive, all about clearing enemies as soon as they appeared. Mixing the two doesn't feel natural. And that's where Resident Evil Survivor comes in. It came out in 2000, right after Resident Evil 3 and just before Code Veronica. It's the first Resident Evil game to go full first person, years before Capcom circled back to that idea with Resident Evil 7. And on paper, it sounds like a disaster. You take a series built on atmosphere and puzzles and strip it down to running through buildings and streets just shooting. The US version didn't even support the light gun. It was pulled after a recent tragedy involving a school, so you were stuck using a controller for a game that was designed around aiming at a TV. And the critics ripped it apart for that, and for pushing hardware that just wasn't ready for real-time first-person Resident Evil. But really, once you get past the clunky controls and the short runtime, Survivor isn't some unplayable wreck. It's a weird experiment, but it's also a snapshot of Capcom trying something new. It has branching paths, alternate weapons, enough that makes you want to try and get them all, and enough little twists that make a replay worth it. And looking back now, it feels like a stepping stone. A rough draft for the kind of first-person Resident Evil we'd actually see decades later. So yeah, Survivor is laud, but it's also more fun than people give it credit for. And if you look at it as part of the series' history, it's a lot more important than the worst Resident Evil label makes it sound. The game didn't just look different, but it felt different too. We went from fixed camera angles and tank controls to suddenly being dropped in first person. That's a huge shift. Up until this point, Resident Evil's whole identity was tied to slow movement, inventory management, puzzles, and fixed camera angles. The tank controls limited you on purpose. They made you commit to every turn and every shot. That friction is part of why the first three games did so well. Survivor strips that back. Now you're in the character's eyes, moving room to room, fighting zombies, dogs, hunters. It sounds like a natural jump forward, but in practice it just threw people off. The controls are a big reason why. Survivor didn't fully abandon its roots. It's not a modern FPS where you just aim and shoot freely. The movement still carries this tank-like weight. You don't whip around or strafe. Turning feels a bit slower, and you still have to ready your gun before you can shoot. It's this weird hybrid, part Resident Evil, part maybe GoldenEye, but then it ends up being neither. Timing here is important as well. By 2000, PC shooters had already nailed smooth controls, stuff like Quake, Half-Life, Unreal Tournament. These games were super fast and on point. On console, GoldenEye showed you could make an FPS work with a controller, but Survivor didn't hit that same level. It came halfway, maybe not even that, and a lot of people noticed. And part of this is also just the era. Dual-stick controls weren't the standard yet. The DualShock existed, but most players weren't used to moving and aiming it with two sticks. Survivor makes you aim with a reticle that isn't smooth, move with controls that don't feel modern, and play it like a shooter even though it's not fully built like one. And the end result was Resident Evil Survivor looked like an FPS, but it didn't really play like one. And to fans of the first 3 games, it didn't feel much like a Resident Evil anymore. And to shooter fans, it didn't feel like a real FPS either. It sat in this middle ground that just fell a bit short on both sides. But it wasn't just different because of perspective. The issues ran a bit deeper. In Japan, the game shipped with light gun support. That's how it was meant to be played. But in North America, Capcom cut that feature. The Columbine shootings had just happened, and they didn't want the controversy. So instead of aiming with a gun con, you were stuck with a controller. That single change gutted the experience. What was supposed to feel like an arcade shooter turned it into awkward crosshair dragging. It just never felt quite right. Then there's the hardware. Resident Evil's fixed cameras used pre-rendered backgrounds to hide the PlayStation's limits. In first person, that trick is gone. The PS1 had to render everything in real time, and it shows. The environments are really plain, the textures are a bit muddy. The enemies are mostly recycled from Resident Evil 2, and they look very blocky because they're right up in your face. The whole thing feels stripped down compared to the cinematic presentation people expected. The cutscenes don't help much either. Survivor didn't get the flashy CG sequences of the mainline games. Everything is in-engine. The voice acting is pretty flat, and scenes play out like placeholders instead of highlights. You can really feel the budget cut from this one.
Remember your mission! We're doing a clean sweep of the area! Everyone and everything must be cleansed! Now move out!
All of this changes pacing. The battles are slow because of the controls, the exploration feels a bit empty because the environments lack detail. Story beats don't land because the presentation isn't there. Instead of tension, you get downtime, and instead of atmosphere, you get silence. The end result is a game that feels kind of thin, not just because of design choices, but because of limits it couldn't escape. Without the light gun, without the budget, without the tricks that carried the main series, Survivor never stood a chance of living up to the other games. Survivor does one thing that immediately changes how you approach the game. Unlimited pistol ammo. That's your default weapon, infinite bullets, and right there, all the tension of counting every last round from the mainline games is gone. You never have to strategize with your ammo, you always have something to shoot. For a lot of people, that kills the survival horror vibe, but for me, I kinda like it. It makes Survivor into this weird comfort game, a place where you can just turn your brain off and start shooting zombies without having to worry about anything. It strips off the stress of the traditional Resident Evil ammo management and leans into the pure arcade fun. That doesn't mean resources don't matter though. The other guns, like the shotgun, the magnum, the grenade gun, still run on limited ammo. Finding those rounds feels just as satisfying as it does in the main series to me. You'll still think about if it's worth pulling out the big weapons for a zombie or if you want to save them later for the bigger guys. But the unlimited pistol shifts the baseline. You're never desperate. And in a way, that's the whole identity of Survivor. And where I think it gets more interesting is the branching paths. The first time you play, you might not even notice how much changes depending on your choices. But after playing through it again, you start to see it. Each route introduces you to different characters, different story beats, and different pistols. Every path unlocks its own handgun, and that becomes your prize for finishing it. One shoots faster, one hits harder but reloads slow. Some have longer clips, others reload quickly. They're not massive changes, but they add this little layer of variety that rewards you for running through the game again. By the time you've cleared all the routes, you've built up an arsenal of sidearms you can pick up on future playthroughs. It's a super simple system, but it makes the short runtime feel more replayable than people give it credit for. And that's one of the other reasons I like it, the runtime. It doesn't drag, it doesn't pretend to be this huge, sprawling campaign. You can beat it in one sitting, and instead of feeling shortchanged, that's part of what makes it enjoyable. You get in, shoot a bunch of zombies, mess with the new pistols, and then you're out. It never overstays its welcome. That's why I think Survivor's fun. Even with all of its clunky execution, it's not trying to be Resident Evil 1, 2, or 3. It's more like an experiment. What happens when we take that world, those enemies, and that atmosphere, and throw it into an arcade-style shooter. It's nowhere near polished, and it's definitely not deep, but it's quick, it's replayable, and surprisingly satisfying when you lean into what it actually is instead of comparing it to the mainline series. In a weird way, it even complements the core games, I think. Survivor doesn't really add much to the story, it's not essential to understanding the bigger Resident Evil timeline. But it's a different lens on the same universe, and sometimes that's enough. and that's the core loop. An unlimited pistol that keeps you moving no matter what, branching paths for replayability, and a structure short enough that you actually want to play it again. It's not survival horror in the traditional sense, but it's fun, and that's the piece most people miss when they write this game off as just a failure. And just real quick, I want to take a second to thank everyone for all the support I've been getting recently. These Resident Evil videos have really brought a lot of new people to the channel. We're getting really close to 3,000 subs. Almost all of you seem to be enjoying the content also, and honestly, I couldn't be happier about that. If you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and also try out the new hype button. Right now, it's only on the mobile version of YouTube. It should be right next to the like button, but hitting that gives the video hype points, which basically tells YouTube, hey, this video is worth showing to more people. I think that feature is one of the big reasons so many of you have found the channel recently. And just one more thing, if you're on Discord, I'd love for you to join the server. The link is in the description. It's still pretty small, but it's growing, and that's one of the best places to drop video requests if you have them. But again, thank you all for so much support recently. Let's get back to Survivor. The game drops you into the shoes of Ark Thompson, not someone that we've heard of before in the series. He's not a cop, not a STARS member. He's an outsider. A detective that Leon himself sent to check on Umbrella and what they're doing on Sheena Island. But as usual, things start out pretty badly. Ark's helicopter goes down. He wakes up with memory loss, barely holding on to who he even is.
But I just can't remember.
From there, the game leans hard into confusion. Ark is tricked, or maybe just convinces himself, that he's Vincent Goldman, the Umbrella executive running the island. That's where the story starts to get pretty dark. The real Vincent is the one who ordered Sheena Island's experiments. Umbrella was kidnapping children, extracting something called beta-heteronon-serotonin from their bodies. It's the kind of over-the-top science you'd expect from this era of Resident Evil. But the point is pretty simple. Umbrella was using kids to mass-produce tyrants. That's the scale of horror Ark walks into. The setting itself is pretty important. This all takes place after the destruction of Raccoon City. Survivor was one of the first games to show us what Umbrella was up to outside the main outbreak. Sheena Island becomes a side stage where Umbrella's cruelty plays out in a different way, not through a city or a mansion, but a factory built on experimentation. Ark isn't alone either. Across the story, he runs into Lot and Lily Klein, two siblings whose parents worked for Umbrella before the company destroyed their lives. Depending on the path you choose, their role shifts, but they become the emotional anchor to a plot that's otherwise feels pretty detached. By the end, Ark finds out who he really is. He's not Vincent. He's the man sent to investigate him. The facility starts a self-destruction countdown, as always. And the final showdown is with the Hypnos Tyrant, another Umbrella monster that's unique to this game. You fight on the helipad, one of the most familiar finales in Resident Evil. And then Ark escapes with the children as Sheena Island collapses into the fire. With all that left behind him, the game signs off with one more tradition. If you finish under the right conditions, you unlock a rocket launcher with infinite ammo. Because even in a spin-off, Resident Evil still needs an infinite launcher.
I don't know, but don't worry. We can fly as long as we have fuel.
That's the spine of Survivor's story. But the interesting part is how the game actually lets you move through it. Like I've said before, Survivor has branching paths. At a handful of decision points, the game asks you to pick between multiple routes. You might head into the arcade, the library, or the hospital. Each choice shifts what you see next. It's not like Resident Evil 2, where you have A and B scenarios that rewrite half the game. Here, the destination changes. The enemies you run into change, and the story beats adjust just enough to make a second run worthwhile. One path might put you face to face with a specific antagonist. Another might give you more background on Umbrella's work, or change the order of events. Some critics wrote it off though, saying the ending is basically the same no matter what you do, and that's true. You'll still uncover Ark's identity, you'll still fight the Hypnos Tyrant, and Sheena Island is still going to blow up, but the details along the way are different. You see different pieces of Umbrella's mess depending on the path. It also dictates which villains you get more screen time. So on your first playthrough, you might miss whole character dynamics or lore hints unless you come back for another run. That branching design adds replayability in a way most people don't associate with Survivor. It's subtle and it doesn't rewrite the story, but it gives you a reason to start over. And in a series that's usually kind of linear, I think that's worth paying attention to.
Yes! I'm not Vincent, I'm Ark!
Resident Evil Survivor gets a bad rap, and honestly, a lot of that comes from expectations, I feel. People wanted another Resident Evil 2 or 3. They wanted that same depth, puzzles, atmosphere. And what they got instead was something that looked familiar on the surface but played completely different. And because of that, most people wrote it off without even really giving it a shot. But the thing is, once you actually sit down with it, Survivor has its own kind of fun. At first, the gameplay feels off, the controls are weird, and you can tell it's not built like the modern FPS. But once you get locked into the loop, it starts to click. Unlimited pistol ammo changes the tone. You're not sweating every bullet like the mainline games. Instead, you're just shooting zombies and moving forward. It's simple, but it's satisfying. And then you realize each path gives you a different pistol, with their own quirks, faster fire, stronger rounds, different reload speeds. It adds this light collecting element that makes replays feel better than you'd expect. That was my surprise with Survivor. It's not deep, it's not complex, there's no puzzles, no backtracking, nothing that asks very much of you. And that's exactly why it works for me. It's short, it's straightforward, and sometimes that's what you want. A game where you can just shut your brain off for a little bit and run through Umbrella's nightmare factory from a new angle. I really think Survivor deserved a remake, and the perfect time would have been during the Wii, when the light gun shooters were back in style. It would have slotted perfectly alongside the Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles. Today it's a bit harder to picture though. Light guns aren't really a thing anymore, and this isn't first person in the same way Resident Evil 7 or 8 are. Survivor is basically a rail shooter without the rails, but I still think it'd be amazing to revisit Sheena Island inside the RE engine. The story also gets overlooked a lot. Most people don't even think about it, they just dismiss Survivor as that bad Resident Evil game on the PS1, because they've heard other people say it. But if you look at the actual lore, Umbrella experimenting on children to mass-produce tyrants is one of the darkest threads in the whole series. It doesn't tie deep into the mainline cast, sure, but it does expand the world. It shows Umbrella's reach outside of Raccoon City. That alone makes it more than just a forgotten spin-off. So why should you play Survivor today? Honestly, it depends on who you are. If you're the type of person who always focuses on the negative trying to find something bad in the game, you won't like this game. The flaws are obvious, but if you can go in with an open mind, drop the expectations, and just play it for what it is, you'll find something there. A quick, weird, flawed, but surprisingly fun Resident Evil experiment. Not every game has to be a masterpiece. Not every game has to aim for greatness. Sometimes it's enough just for a game to be fun, and that's what Survivor is. And that's Resident Evil Survivor. This video was part of what I've been calling the Resident Evil arc here on the Save Room. I'm looking at it almost like seasons. Each season follows an era of the series so we can really explore how Resident Evil evolved game by game. And I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I'm covering all of them. People still ask if I'll do this or that entry, but when I say all, I mean all. Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy is going to have its own video eventually. Because almost nobody is making videos like this for individual games. Most channels lump the whole series into one or two big videos. That's not what this is. That's not what this channel is. Every game deserves its own look. And that's not just Resident Evil, it's everything I cover. So with this video, we're closing out Season 1, which was Resident Evil 1 through Survivor. And next up will be Season 2, and we're starting that off with Code Veronica. And we'll be ending with one of the biggest games of all time, Resident Evil 4. After that, we'll roll into Season 3 and so on. And I really do want to take a second and just thank everyone for all the support recently. The channel's been growing extremely fast, and the positivity means a lot. And I probably shouldn't even say it because I'll tempt fate, but out of hundreds of comments this month, maybe 5 were negative, and that's it. And this is the internet. I was not expecting that. Everything else has just been love and support, or people sharing memories these videos brought back. And honestly, those memory comments are some of my favorites. Seeing a game I covered sparks something in you. But if you want to hang out with the community more directly, join the Discord. The link's in the description. I usually respond pretty quickly in there also, and it's also a good place to make video requests if there's a specific game you want me to talk about. And again, don't forget the hype button. It's only on the mobile app right now, but it really does help directly push the video harder. But thanks again for being here, and as always, I'll see y'all later.